Hello, and welcome to Understanding My Gifted Child, which is the first in our series for gifted education. My name is Dr. Jo Tuite, and it's my pleasure to be here with you today. To share just a little bit about my background with you, I've worked in the area of gifted education for just a little over 32 years. My educational background is a bit varied. I have undergraduate degrees in business and in sociology. I have a master's degree in educational administration and a doctorate in educational leadership with a certification in high ability education. Lending context to my education are my children. I have 4 kiddos who have and are running the gambit, educational gambit, if you will. I have a student requiring special education services, another that's high achieving. I have a creative thinker and a gifted or high ability learner. So that's enough about me. I want to be respectful of your time tonight. So let's go ahead and jump into our topic. Again, today's topic is understanding my gifted child. Much of the information that I'll be sharing with you tonight can be found in these resources that you see on your screen. There are a few additional resources that I'll use tonight, and those will be mentioned on the individual slides. I would like to point out that the Indiana Association for the Gifted and the National Association for Gifted Children are two excellent resources that I would highly recommend and upon which I will highly rely upon tonight. I'd also recommend the scholarly work that's done by Dr. Lisa Rubinstein, particularly her work in the areas of gifted education and creativity. So in order to move forward tonight and make sure that we have the same basis of understanding, we're first going to start with a few definitions. We're going to talk about 3 different groups of students. We're going to talk about high achievers, high ability or gifted learners, and creative thinkers. So let's first start by defining what each of those mean. First, we have our high achievers. Our high achievers tend to exercise grit. Angela Lee Duckworth, who is a psychologist, has said that grit is passion and sustained perseverance applied in achieving long-term and meaningful goals. I always think of grit as my parents described it as I was growing up, where you just dig in your heels and push forward. So our high achievers tend to dig in and push forward. High achievers need to achieve. They seek out challenges for their own sake. They value time. They listen and hear. And what I mean by that is they understand, perhaps intuitively, that brilliant ideas come from the most unexpected places. And listening, paying attention, helps you to be able to find those brilliant ideas. And high achievers are also action-oriented. They plot out every action that they simply can. They listen and are able to then spot those opportunities. Pablo Picasso once said, action is the foundational key to all success. And again, our high achievers seem to intuit this. So next, let's put a definition to our high ability and gifted and talented population. High ability and gifted and talented are terms that are often used interchangeably. Here in Indiana, we tend to lean more toward using high ability. Most of the states surrounding us and most of the states in the US even tend to use gifted and talented. But again, they are often used interchangeably. So depending on which researcher or theorist you follow, anywhere from 5 to 10% of the population, a school-age population, is made up of high ability or gifted and talented students. A gifted person is someone who shows or has the potential for showing an exceptional level of performance in one or more area. That is how the National Association for Gifted Children defines high ability. Similarly, Indiana's mandate, which you'll see there on the screen in front of you, is very similar, saying that high ability student means a student who performs at or shows the potential for performing at an outstanding level of accomplishment in at least one domain when compared to other students of the same age, same experience or environment, and is characterized by exceptional gifts, talents, motivation, or interests. You can see there also the different domains listed. There are 5 different domains. And again, it's showing the potential to perform at or performing at least one of those domains. And then we have our creative thinker. I like this definition for creative thinkers that I found from actually a Singapore Child Center. So I'm just going to read it to you. A creative thinker is someone who can come up with new ideas, think in original ways, and explore uncharted territory. Creative thinkers look at things from different perspectives and ask questions that others may not even think about. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Can you think of somebody that you know that may be a creative thinker? Yeah. Researchers in the field of creativity have almost universally agreed that creativity includes both originality and effectiveness. However, there is a researcher, last name of Carrazza, I may be mispronouncing it, hopefully I am not, again, Carrazza, who has argued that that definition is too narrow and only focuses on the static creative achieve, which would be kind of like the output, and doesn't consider the dynamic nature of the process. And Dr. Lisa Rubenstein, who I mentioned earlier, said that creativity is not just exhibited in the final unique and useful product, but it also is seen throughout the process. So if we look at all of these things in kind of that broad picture, creativity includes originality, effectiveness, the process or journey, and then the final output. So now that we've kind of given some very brief but working definitions to each of these categories of learners, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the characteristics that these learners have. So you can see on this side-by-side chart, first column is our high achievers, center column is our gifted or high ability learner, and our third column there are creative thinkers. So let's just pick out a couple of these. I won't go through all of them, just to kind of do a little quick comparison here. Let's see, our high achiever, we'll pick that first one there, remembers the answers. Our gifted or high ability learner poses unforeseen questions, and our creative thinker sees exceptions. Let's drop down just a little bit, maybe about halfway there. We see that a high achiever needs 6 to 8 repetitions in order to master content, where our high ability or gifted learner needs about 1 to 3 repetitions to master the content. And interestingly, a creative thinker questions the need for mastery altogether. Let's pick out maybe one more. You see at the very bottom, the high achiever gets A's. A's are very important to the high achiever. For our high ability or gifted learner, they may or may not be motivated by grades. Getting that A is not necessarily as important to them. And a creative thinker may not be motivated by grades either. However, their reasonings are a bit different, and we'll dive a little bit more into that here in just a bit. Another characteristic that I want to mention, it's not necessarily reflected here on the chart, as it relates to social interactions, is that the high achiever enjoys the company of age peers. So they tend to hang out with those in the same grade or the same class that they're in. The gifted or high ability learner prefers the company of intellectual peers. You can think of that like an idea mate rather than an age mate. They enjoy the company of peers when the peer group understands the shared idea, though. And then our creative thinkers prefer the company of creative peers, but more so often work alone. And so these columns, though, are not mutually exclusive. A high achiever may also be a creative thinker, and a gifted learner may also be a creative thinker, and a creative thinker might be a high achiever, and so forth. So the columns aren't mutually exclusive. There can be crossover between these. So now that we have some definitions and we have some characteristics placed, let's take a look at how this might appear in a classroom, because most classrooms are going to have all three types of learners in the classroom. So they'll have their high achiever, their gifted learner, their creative learner. So Dr. Bertie Kingor, in Understanding Our Gifted, said that this cartoon, as well as the next one I'm going to show you, helped students and teachers to understand kind of that three-way comparison between the high achievers, gifted learners, and creative thinkers. And in this first cartoon, the teacher has just announced to this class an assignment. So the high achiever, they're sitting there now thinking and trying to determine what is it that the teacher most wants. The high achiever wants to please the teacher and satisfy those intentions. So they're questioning, what do you really want? We see our high ability or gifted learner, they're pondering what to do that would be of the most interest to them. What do they want to learn? And so you see the gifted learner posing the question, or perhaps the statement, what I would like to do is. And then the creative thinkers, when they hear this assignment, their mind just starts to race with all of the different diverse and varied possibilities that could possibly be explored. And they're thinking, well, what about this? Oh, what about this? Ah, what about that? So their mind is just racing with possibilities. In this next cartoon, the teacher has posed a question to the class. So a question has just been asked. The high achiever, they're thinking, ooh, I know the answer to this. They're excited. They're anxious to jump in and respond because they know that they're in control. They've got the answer. Our gifted learner considers the different nuances and alternative perspectives that the question could possibly contain. So they're sitting there thinking, the question could mean this, or it might suggest that, or another way to say that is this, or yeah, but. So they're again thinking about all of the different nuances and alternatives that may exist within the question that's been posed. Our creative thinker is still obsessed with the seemingly endless possibilities to the earlier assignment and has been concentrating so much on that and on the ideas coming from that he completely misses the teacher's question. So these two cartoons represent very different ways of thinking, different ways of processing information and acting on that information. And within the classroom, we're going to have all of these three types of thinkers and learners. So now let's add one more layer to consider, and that's the layer of asynchronous development. So according to the National Association for Gifted Children, asynchronous development describes that mismatch, if you will, between cognitive, emotional, and physical development. While you may see this in all children, gifted children often have significant variations within themselves and develop unevenly across all levels. Again, that's not to say that our high achievers and our creative learners don't experience asynchrony. It's just simply more prevalent in our gifted learners. So when a child is advanced in some areas, but their development is only typical of their age group in others, it's often going to lead to frustration, and or maybe even some behavioral issues. So that's one reason it's really important to identify asynchronous development. So let's kind of go ahead and break this down. So in a typical child, the intellectual, physical, and emotional development are going to develop at the same rate, and they're going to be similar to other children in their same age bracket. With a high ability child, the intellectual, physical, and emotional development is often out of sync with each other. So one area may be very well developed and another maybe not so much. And they're also often out of sync with their same age peers. So let's talk about this in terms of an example. So let's take a 10-year-old girl, for example. In terms of her intellectual maturity, she is critically analyzing complex literary pieces. She writes complex, detailed, and entertaining short stories, enjoys pre-algebra. And then in terms of her physical maturity, she can barely ride a bicycle. The mechanics are challenging for her. And then in terms of her emotional maturity, she's often reduced to tears at the thought of giving away a stuffed animal or a toy that she was never really fond of and actually hasn't even looked at or played with it in years. So you can see that these are, for a typical 10-year-old child, these are out of sync with others in the same peer group, and then out of sync with each other in terms of the intellectual, physical, and emotional development. If you're in the Zoom room with me right now, would you drop in the chat box, either to me privately or to the whole group, what types of challenges you think this 10-year-old student may experience? I'll give you just a moment to drop those in. Okay, good. Thank you. Hey, you can feel free to continue dropping those in. I'm going to go ahead and share just a few of these uh, to keep us moving tonight. So a few of those challenges that this 10-year-old girl with asynchronous development might experience to fit in. Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the chronologically age-oriented structure. That's going to be a challenge for her. Hard to relate to peers. Absolutely. And hard for her peers to relate to her. So that's kind of a mutual challenge there. Increased frustration with peers and in school. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so great answers. Great answers. This 10-year-old girl who has an intellectual maturity that's well above her age group, and then physical and emotional maturity levels that are below her age group, is definitely going to feel a challenge to fit in with that peer group. It's going to be difficult for her to relate to her peers and also her peers to relate to her. And because of that, it is going to create more than likely some frustration. And you may be wondering then, what are some ways to help your child as they experience asynchrony? GC, National Association for Gifted Children, they provide some of the strategies. Actually, I think this is all of their strategies that you see on the screen in front of you. So let's just go ahead and go through these and take a little bit deeper look at them. So one of the things that they recommend is focusing on your child's strengths. I know that with one of my children who was struggling with asynchronous development, it was very easy for me to focus on those things that I know needed to be built up. The areas where her maturity was a bit delayed in comparison to her peers. But it's really important to focus on the child's strengths. They're already perhaps aware of the challenges that they're having with the in the other areas. And so building them up and focusing on those strengths will be important and very helpful. Help your children and others around them to understand what it means to be gifted. Help them to understand what asynchronous development is, and then to set some realistic expectations. Explore and teach strategies to address misunderstandings, to help them be mindful, to learn to self-advocate. We often find that helping them to use kind of mind-body tools like yoga and martial arts can also be excellent strategies. Find multiple peer groups for your child. This one is also another fantastic one that I personally have used and found to be really helpful. In this one, you're finding a peer group to match that cognitive ability or intellectual level of your child so that they can share in that realm. For my daughter, she was had a high intellectual maturity level and was very interested in having deep discussions, philosophical debates even, and this was at a very young age. So finding that peer group where she could exercise that muscle, if you will, was really helpful. But then also making sure that she had a peer group where they could share similar interests. They were at the same time, she was really into My Little Pony. So making sure that she had other friends who had similar interests and she could, talk and play with them as well. It should be noted that the mental age match is sometimes more essential than the chronological age match. Another strategy that I know has been very successful is bibliotherapy, and that's finding books where the main characters have unique abilities or uneven development, similar characteristics to your own child, and then that allows them to see somebody else that's similar to them. It helps with not feeling alone, but also allows them to see how that character handle different situations and learn from that. And then as parents, it's going to be important for you to connect with other parents who are experiencing similar challenges. That way you have support as well. And then finally, helping educators, the teachers in your school and other practitioners to understand what you're seeing in the home. So maybe keeping a log or a portfolio or just a few even quick written notes can help the educators working with your child in the classroom and in the school system to understand, have a more full picture of where your student is in terms of their own development. Next, we're going to take a look at social and emotional development. So high ability kids are curious, they're inquisitive, they're driven, for them, learning is an emotional experience. They want to learn, but they also need to learn. Knowledge is definitely their passion. High ability children not only demonstrate a greater cognitive understanding, but they also exhibit a heightened awareness of their environment and of their surroundings. And this translates into intense emotions and feelings. They can often develop fears based upon observations. Couple of examples. They may be watching let's say they're watching a football game, sitting there watching a game with you, and they see a professional athlete get injured in the game. And so now that becomes a fear of getting hurt. They may be watching the news and hear of riots or gangs or wars, and that becomes a fear for their personal safety. Or perhaps they're reading about an extinct animal species and they become depressed over animal welfare. So again, they can develop fears based upon their observations because of the intense emotions and feelings that they have and they experience. They feel things strongly and may find it hard to understand why others don't feel things as strongly as they do. They also may feel the need to hide who they are. This is often referred to as masking. Um, Especially hiding their intellect, that love of learning, or their passion for knowledge. Uh, Dr. Coleman suggested that high ability students learn early on that the way people treat them changes when their difference becomes evident. So as soon as somebody learns that difference in them, they begin to treat them differently. So high ability or gifted students learn to adapt, which often means hiding part of themselves. They may, at least in public, adopt the behaviors, adopt the values and the attitudes of their peers. For example, a student that typically gets all A's because they put in the work or enjoy learning will begin blaming their good grades on luck. Oh man, I got lucky with that one, instead of on their passion for the subject. Or they may begin purposely failing because that's going to, again, make them feel like they are more similar to their peers. And again, hiding that part of them that they truly enjoy, that love of learning, that passion. Hiding or masking who they are can actually be dangerous because they can lose their sense of identity. They lose that sense of who they are. And that can lead to depression, as you can imagine, as well as other things. Many of the strategies, though, that I shared for asynchronous development can be helpful in working with your child in areas of social and emotional development. So there's some really wonderful overlapping between those strategies. So next, let's take a look at some common myths and break those down a bit. So one of the common myths is that high ability students should be given large quantities of work at the average grade level. So let's say your student is a fifth grader and in language arts, they excel and maybe working at an eighth grade level. We're going to say they're really excelled. And the myth is that in order to keep them challenged, you just need to give them a lot more homework, give them extra projects. But the fact is that high ability students need a high degree of academic challenge. So not more work at that fifth grade level in our example, but giving them work that's more reflective of that eighth grade level so that it's providing them with an academic challenge. Another myth is that high ability students will make straight A's. The fact is that high ability students will not always perform well in school, especially if the student is feeling unmotivated or unchallenged. Those grades may be lower because, again, thinking back to the chart we looked at earlier for that high ability student, making A's, grades are not as important to them as the actual act of learning is important to them. Excuse me. Another myth is that high ability students are socially popular with their peers. More accurately, high ability students are often socially ostracized, especially at that secondary level, because their interests are different and they relate to their peers and relate to the world in different manners. Excuse me. Another myth is that high ability students learn best on their own. High ability students can learn, some do learn best on their own, but they can also benefit from being grouped with intellectual peers for a significant part of their school day, because it's, a lot of great learning and can take place in those group settings, again, with their intellectual peers. It's kind of that old saying that iron sharpens iron. So it's so with students that are of the same intellectual level. Another myth is that high ability students are from upper middle class professional homes. And truthfully, high ability students are from all different types of homes, from very diverse racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds. And again, as I mentioned previously, about 5 to 10% of the school age population is within the high ability category, and that comes from all different areas. And then the final myth that I'll mention this evening is that extra attention given to high ability students fosters snobbery and is likely to lead to an elitist class. Giftedness is fragile, and every child deserves an education that's appropriate to their individual needs. Children at both ends of the spectrum and everywhere in between need a special education that is especially for them and feeds their needs and their passions and their interests. So this leads us into our next discussion point, which is the concept of equity versus excellence. And there are two major overarching philosophies within educational delivery, and those are the philosophies of equity and excellence. While in society, we tend to celebrate those with exceptional skills, such as football great Peyton Manning, or theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, or poet Emily Dickinson. These are greats that we celebrate. In the realm of K-12 education, excellence, or high ability, is often seen as elitist. Gallagher suggests that it's the appearance of genetic unfairness, the genes with which we're born, basically, which may be the underlying cause of the inequitable treatment of high ability students, because it's much easier to blame social conditions than an unfair universe. As parents, you may be wondering how you work within this construct than to advocate for your child. So let's talk a little bit about advocating for your child's needs. First and foremost, talk to your child. What are their frustrations with school? What are their joys in school? Are they being appropriately stretched and challenged? Are they bored? And then it's important for you to know, does your school have a high ability program? If no, what do you do? Ask about the options that are available for your high ability child. Do they offer differentiation, enrichment in or out of school? Do they offer content, subject, or grade acceleration, independent work? Whatever the case may be sure to ask what they do offer. What are their options? If they do have a high ability program, it'll be important for you to know, how are students identified? What year does the identification process take place? When does the program begin? Is identification permitted throughout the school year, or is it a single administration? Are additional testing options available for borderline students? And are they using multifaceted assessments, or is it just a single standardized test? By multifaceted, it would utilize, you could use a standardized test and perhaps a portfolio, or a nonverbal evaluation. So that different methods are being used to identify giftedness. Are the national, state, or local norms being used? Local norms are going to allow the greater number of children to be identified. And it's based upon what's happening there in the local community, which, in my personal opinion, seems to be more fair for the students within the community. Are nominations allowed? And if so, who can do those nominations? And is actual identification done by a single individual, or is it done by a committee? So again, lots of different questions. This is all preparing yourself and making sure that you have the information that you're going to need in order to advocate for your child. Finally, once students are identified, you need to know, how are they served? Are the services in content areas only, or do they include other areas? Is it a self-contained classroom, an honor section specifically for high ability students? Is it a pull-out program? Is it an inclusion program? You'll need to know what type of training the high ability teachers have had. Have they undergone specialized training? Do they have to have a license in high ability education? And what type of professional development do they receive so that they're keeping up on scores and changes in knowledge, research, and trends? And then in terms of the curriculum, are they using just extra work, as we mentioned a bit ago with the myths, or are they providing a depth and breadth of education within the curriculum? There are lots of questions to ask and information to gather. So here are a few more things that I can offer to give you some help in preparing to advocate for your child. One of the top things I always recommend is to keep a portfolio that reflects your child's skill development. This can include, copies of homework. Especially recommend including graded homework. That is helpful in being able for the individual or committee making the identification to see how it was assessed. So copies of homework, independent projects, copies of awards, lists of extracurricular activities, and those types of things. I also recommend to either develop or join a support system so that you have somebody else that you can share concerns and resources with. And then collaborate with your child's teacher and administrators. You're going to want to keep them up to date on your child's behaviors and interests. And make sure that you're sharing that portfolio with them. This will help them to see the child more as a whole, because they see a certain set of behaviors and have certain experiences with their child within the school setting. So it's very helpful to have insight into what you're seeing outside of the school setting. You ask if there are additional opportunities for your child to pursue their interests, to pursue their skills, their passions, and so forth. And then, if at all possible, and I know this can be really challenging if you have other children or if you work, but volunteer in the classroom or in the school when it's possible. That will also help you to be able to see how the school functions from within, but also help you in developing good working relationship with those within the school system. And again, that's all going to be helpful to you as you begin advocating for your child. And then don't be afraid to ask for an evaluation or an additional evaluation to identify your child's skills, their strengths, and their weaknesses. So now that we've kind of gathered this information, and let's talk about how to begin actually advocating for your child. The first step is always best to start with the teacher. So set up a time to talk to your child's teacher. Go in knowing the myths and knowing your child's needs and having an understanding for how identification is done within your school system and what services are offered within the school system. If you're not able to adequately meet your child's needs or work out an appropriate solution with the classroom teacher, then you'll want to request a meeting with the school administrator, the principal, high ability coordinator, somebody in that administrative type role. Before this meeting, I would recommend maybe diving in a little bit deeper to the research, join or take a look at the different state and local gifted associations, and kind of soak up, if you will, the advice that they offer. Understand the different educational and curricular options that are available, both within and outside of the school system, and try to get a feel for what's going to work best for your child based upon what you learn. And then take with you that portfolio. I'd also make sure to have with you grade reports, copies of testing, so that it's all right there at your fingertips. Nobody has to step away from the table to look anything up. You've got it all right there with you. So during the meeting, you're going to want to focus on your child's needs. Sometimes it can become really easy to go to that place of making sure they understand what the school district's failings are or what they're not offering. But keeping a positive tone, staying focused on your child's needs are going to go much further in getting the services for your student that you need. Definitely have a specific goal in mind, what you want that outcome to be, but stay open-minded to other approaches and other options that they may have available or that they may work with you to develop. And ideally, you're going to leave that meeting with a written plan so that you all are on the same page and can move forward together. If you are faced with a resistant administration, don't be afraid to escalate and move to the next level, whether that be a district level administrator, the superintendent, board of education. Just continue moving it up until there's no place to move up from. But again, start with the teacher. And if you're not able to work out something to your satisfaction that's going to meet your child's needs there, then you're going to want to move to the principal or the high ability coordinator within the school system. And again, you can move up from there if you need to do so. We have covered a lot of material in a very short amount of time. We defined and looked at the characteristics for high achievers, gifted and high ability learners, and creative thinkers. We reviewed asynchronous development and strategies for working with your child through this. We talked about social and emotional needs that high ability learners often have, and how many of those strategies for asynchronous development are also very helpful in working with social and emotional needs. We talked about some of the myths that exist and what the actual facts are. We discussed the overarching concepts of equity versus excellence and reviewed ways of advocating for your child's needs. So we have a few minutes left where I can take some questions. If you're here in the Zoom room, you can drop those questions in the chat box and I'll answer them in just a moment after I stop the recording. If you're watching this on one of our social media platforms, you can drop those questions in the comments and I will be sure to respond and get an answer back for you. Before I get to those questions, I want to thank you all so much for joining me for Understanding My Gifted Child. A recording of this program is going to be posted on the Academy's Facebook page, as well as on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and refer to this and use it as a resource. I hope that you will join me for the second in our Gifted Education series, which will take place on November 20th, when we'll talk about ways that you can help your child succeed. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a beautiful day.